when the dust settles and you've got, like you said, the certificate on the wall, that it almost as if you're still, it's like that just went away. You know, it's not real.
Well, to tell you how it manifests for this one particular accolade, my master instructor said, "Hey, it's time for you to test." And I honestly said, I'm not ready. And he said, no, you have to. And he kind of cajoled me into it. And finally, he just pulled the senior MasterCard and said, look, you're testing. And you can ask my wife and kids. I tested, passed, got the rank. It was like, yeah, okay, I got it. So this can't be that important because I got it. Let's move along and see what happens.
Welcome to the Chris and Retro podcast. Thank you for joining again. Today's guest, we kind of rolled the dice with somebody that may get me canceled right out of the gate here. So I'm actually really excited. I brought on Lester Hicks today, and I think it's going to be a great conversation. There's a lot of perspectives to how we live our lives and you know, what we have to deal with. And I think that you'll find this to be very educational and hopefully entertaining along the way. Les he's a self-employed business owner. He's a 5th degree black belt in Tung Sudo, a 2nd degree black belt in Hapkido, instructor certification in Kali, which is stick and knife fighting, instructor certification in Yang style, long Tai Chi, extensive training in close quarter combat, focus on knife work, instructor certification in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So from a martial arts standpoint, I saw knife work, and I can attest to the fact that he plays with knives, having grown up with this man. He's got a BS in Biblical Studies, which is a Bachelor of Science, with emphasis in biblical languages, Greek and Hebrew. Noted those are both post-mortem languages that we've joked about as we were setting this up. He's got a Master's of Arts in Religion, emphasis in Old Testament Studies, ABD status in Westminster Cemetery with the Ph.D. Old Testament Studies. And Leslie, you can explain that a little bit for me.
Yeah, it simply means that I completed all my coursework for a Ph.D. program. And it's not uncommon in America to have a lot of classwork, and then you go to someplace like Great Britain or someplace in Europe and complete your dissertation. And that's actually what I did. I went to University of Wales and wrote up my dissertation.
So Les has a lot more education than I do because I couldn't even read through his bio and understand all of that he's got going on. So it's pretty impressive. The PhD has from University of Wales, Old Testament Studies and Ancient Near Eastern Narrative. He can read Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, Ugaritic?
Ugaritic, yep.
Syriac,
yep,
French and German, and notice there's no English in there, which I thought was weird, but okay. He's a husband and father of 3. He is my cousin, and he's the owner of Chosen Martial Arts in Pennsylvania. So with all that, welcome to the show, Les.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's good to be here.
Nah, I'm super happy to have you here. You know, we were doing some pre-show work on this, and it was like, you know, what direction do we take with this? Because we got a lot of experiences, and some of them probably not completely great for what we're trying to accomplish here. But I think that your story, honestly, when I look at it from a third party and not just from my own experiences, is pretty phenomenal, especially with some of the things that you've accomplished. And, you know, I guess I want to jump right in and, you know, talk about your journey some, but, you know, what started first for you, killing people or speaking to the dead? I mean, I probably should word that differently. You know, was it martial arts or was it academic, you know, curiosity and excellence?
Well, I'll be honest with you, the academic curiosity has always been there. Whenever I had a chance to study or learn something, I always did it 110%. I never just jumped in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it was actually martial arts that was my first love. My sister, ironically, started training in Tung Sudo when I was about 15 years old. And she came home and started punching me in the head, and I realized I couldn't stop it. I said, I can't let my little sister beat me up.
And she still does.
Exactly right. And so I jumped in and started training there and fell in love with it. I mean, for me, there's something about martial arts that's calming. There's something, and that sounds really weird unless you've experienced it, but there's really 3 places in the world that I can feel like I'm me and just be me, you know, let people know who I am. One place is at home, one's at church, and one place is on the studio floor. And so I fell in love with it really early on. Ironically, I told everybody I never would go to college. I never, ever wanted to go to college. And
I actually recall you started out working as an electrician, and I remember that was something that you were going to stick with the trades, and it wasn't really anything you were going to do. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. Yeah, no college, and then 12 years into college, I realized maybe I ought to change my idea.
Right. So let's talk about your influences a little bit, though. Martial arts it's had some real positive influences for you throughout, but your early on influences, it was a little gray. Some of the
Yeah.
people that you respect the most about that style really could have taken you down some pretty ugly paths.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the two biggest influences in my life when it comes to martial arts are my dad, who, I mean, right off the
I'm
bat,
going to qualify that one because I still got to see your father. And I just said ugly influence, and the first word you said was your father.
No, I know the one you're talking about, and he was ugly in influence.
Okay,
But
all right.
but no, my dad. I mean, I remember I think it was kindergarten, coming home. And I said, Dad, I've been punched in the face. I don't know what to do. How do I handle this? And Dad goes, well, if you had an older brother, he'd teach you this, but you don't. So I'm going to teach you. And he taught me how to fight like a man. Well, in kindergarten. I mean, I was kicking guys in the groin. His exact words were: kick them in the groin, bring their head over, lift them up, keep hitting until they fall down, and then when they go down, kick them a couple of times just to remind them it was a bad idea. And so that was a good influence, but an interesting influence. But the one you're talking about was Master John Beam. Most of my martial arts experience goes right back to him. And yeah, he could have taken me in a really, really bad place if it wasn't for a good home life. And I think really God overseeing all of it, we could have gone in some ugly spots. They absolutely could have.
You just said something that we'll call out here in a little bit, and I want to hold that. I'm glad that came up. Home life, that support system around you. So let's put a pin in that because that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. But I do think it's interesting because it wasn't as if you weren't drawn to it. I mean, Master Beam was something that was, that as kids, I mean, that's for us, at least how we were raised. I know today kids are raised slightly differently, but for us, man, if you were tough like that was something you kind of looked to. And, so he was a draw for you significantly.
Yeah, he was everything my dad was to me as far as a fearless man, a willing to fight, but he was really skilled in a lot of things, and so his violence was unique and different. And I mean, he's the only guy I ever cried for at a funeral, and he died a couple of years ago, and I couldn't believe how upset it made me. It was really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because I mean, you saw that humanity in him too, and that's really what we're trying to accomplish here as well. So, we're plugged in through Zoom just as a click, so we'll get a little bit of delays here and there. So I apologize for some of that, but But you've also seen some other people in that story, that throughout your progression of your experience. And the reason the people part of this matters so much is because as we walk through this life and, we talk about these options and these crossroads in life where we're so close to destruction and we're so close to hope, there are, even in your martial arts experience, you have somebody that really could have taken you down a bad path, but you've also had so many more remarkable influences. And I'd like to hear about some of those influences.
Yeah, I mean, the two that I can think of the most, and you're going to hear about my dad a lot. He was always been my friend, always been a father. I guess always been my father. But
the moment he decided, yeah, you're mine.
Yeah, he couldn't get rid of me, so that was it. But he was always honest, I guess is the best way of doing it. He wasn't afraid of me being a young man, being kind of stupid. I mean, I'll never forget, to give you an illustration of how Dad handled some of this stuff. One time something had happened to my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. And I stepped outside with the intention of going and injuring somebody. And Dad's response to me was, he goes, "You're 18. He goes, you can't go do this. You're going to get in trouble if you get caught." And it was my first adult conversation with him. And I said, what would you do? He said, "I wouldn't get caught." And so I said, okay. And I went and did my thing and came back and didn't get caught. So he's always that honesty, that willingness to acknowledge that my emotions were real. Mm-hmm. Let me be myself. But at the same time, trying to kind of give me those guide rails to get me where I got to go. One of the other influences, and Chris and I had talked about it, kids grow up a little differently, but for me, I was always looking for a masculine role model. If you're a panty waist kind of guy who couldn't get himself out of an argument, I just was never impressed. And there was a guy named Jack Donnell who was really influential in me changing my life, of course, getting saved and actually getting all those stupid degrees. He was a truck driver, and he could unscrew your head if he wanted to, but yet he'd cry with you and pray with you if you needed to. And that mixture has always been kind of who I am. It's actually one of the reasons why I don't fit in, I think, some places, is that mixture of what I think is real masculinity wrapped up in, this idea of, what kindness looks like in a man and stuff like that. That willingness to cry if you need to.
I could see that, honestly. I mean, I think of in martial arts, one of my favorite influences, honestly, is John Angelina.
Yeah.
Just because he's that man. I mean, he's got a tremendous amount of skill in terms of his ability to take care of himself and his family, but he will be by your side loyally in a very loving way. He'll hug you, you just don't want to say anything wrong while he's hugging you. I can see what you're saying. These are people that you come across in your life. You talk about your dad. It's kind of funny. Your academic excellence could have taken another turn. I tell a story when we were kids. I got to experience your father as a gangster at like 8 because we were skipping rocks on behind our grandfather's house in a creek, and
by house he means a boulder size. So yeah.
So Lester's version's boulder. Mine was just a little guy rock. And he jumped in front of me. Well, actually, he was standing there, but the problem was I was facing away from him when I grabbed that. I could turn around to skip this rock, and it skips easier on water than the back of his head. I have never seen so much controlled flame come out of a man's face as your dad when he turned to me. I think he wanted to eat me, but knew that probably would have been a thing he couldn't have hid from my mom, who was a bigger gangster than him. And so it was just funny. He's like, that shot to the head, I figured that would probably screw up your academic excellence somewhere down the line. But yeah, no, your dad's always, since we've known him, certainly been a more controlled version. And he's been more domesticated, I guess, is from some of the stories he's told us when he was younger.
Yeah.
So, you talk about, we're some of these influences and family, how important has that support structure? I'll try to draw a lot of relevance to your story to what we're trying to accomplish in the show too, because I think that what happens is sometimes we're so much as a society, hear martial arts, hear about some fight stories, and all of a sudden we just shut it down. This is not really something that's going to help. It's just somebody talking about martial arts. That's actually not true. What we're talking about is the need to have this structure around, and even in that space where we are really talking about combat, hand-to-hand type work, there are still some very positive and negative influences, and it's still about decisions you make in that space about how your path is going to look. And for you, you've had a lot of selected group of support system outside of your family, and you've had a strong family support system. How is that? Tell me how that has impacted your life.
I mean, it's essential. I don't think I'd be the person I am today if I didn't have both a support system in my home, and now that includes my wife and kids, and the support system I had in the studio, where I felt like I could be me, I could ask questions. When I screwed up and fell, unlike so many people, I didn't really grow up in a situation where things were done to me that would create damage. I mean, if anything ever bad happened to me, it's because I was holding a grenade, pulled the wire, and stood there and watched it blow up in my hand. It was always self-inflicted. And to have a family that, again, going back to my dad and my wife, will step up beside me and say, that was kind of stupid. Maybe you should have put it down. Let's move ahead. Let's get this working out. And that's one of the things I didn't find, to be honest with you, in the academic world. In the martial arts world, I was accepted. I am accepted. But in the academic world, there was this game where you either had to, you were in the circle or out of the circle, and they would never help you get in the circle if you weren't already in there. And it was this really awkward kind of elitism that made me never really fit in there. But without the support system, I would not be the guy I am today. Absolutely not.
It's kind of odd because you think about, like, in martial arts, you consider that more of a it's up to you type of thing. But really, it sounds to me like you had more support in martial arts than you did in academics, because academics is more about, like, pack. I think of a bunch of hyenas, honestly. I'm not trying to pick on people, but it just, from what you've described, and I've never been close to there, they wouldn't even let me in those circles to even have the conversation. But it seems like, based on one opinion, one word you use, from what you describe, you could be completely out of any opportunity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was there's an elitism and part of it's because it's so hard to get to where you got to get those degrees, and so there's a sense of, look what I've done, other people can't do this. And I think that's actually one of the things that messed me up, is that I always figured if I could do it, anybody could do it, and that's not actually true, but I always felt that way. So I didn't fit into that, I I didn't do real good pushing people on the outside of the circle. But in martial arts, as long as you were willing to stand up after you got knocked down, to wipe the blood off your nose and just jump back out of the ring, man, we'd accept you in a heartbeat.
Right.
If you weren't good, but you were loyal to the studio, nobody messed with you. We take care of you. And so that's where I felt comfortable. Your accomplishments were on your shoulders totally, yet your instructor was there to help guide you. Where in academic circles, it was a little different.
It is there. I've never made that correlation before, and I appreciate you explaining that, because if you fail in the academic circle, people are not there to help you improve. It doesn't seem. In martial arts, if you screw up something, somebody will work with you 100 times in a row to help you improve on whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Because honestly, as the collective, Kevin Hart jokes about how he took his kids to the ball crawl thing, and his daughter was young enough that she was just getting hit in the head. And the son was young enough, he couldn't hold up his head, and he was just bobbing his head, and he said, and he goes, and I'm short, and he goes, it just wasn't a good look as a unit. I think martial arts kind of looks that way, as how your school or your team, the lowest hanging fruit is important to build that up so as a team, but it doesn't seem to be that way in academics.
Not as well.
It's a lot that way in life generally, though. I mean, we are in a competitive environment. Those you think are loyal around you aren't always that way. So this work that we do on us and recognizing our true standing and where we are in life is critically important. This is where we start telling ourselves lies about high-risk living, because those around us are giving us this feeling that everything's fine, and actually you are going to be alone when it falls apart.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when things have fallen apart, and you've got some stories we'll get into about this, but when things aren't going so well, sometimes you are all you have. And your ability to know who you can reach out to and find support in is going to be critical to you finding, better opportunities. So, I look at your story, and I was honestly trying to test this, because I think it's real easy to get cliche and try to be flattering in my guest and whatever else. And I really can't think of somebody that I know that's accomplished as much as you have. In true form of actually keep leveling up. Now, I know a lot of people that have tried this, tried that, tried martial arts, tried school, whatever else. But if I look at across the board about every single thing, even including in the disciplines within the martial arts that you accomplish, you just keep leveling up. So talk to me about that. I mean, how do you drive yourself? Because there had to be at least 2 days in all those accomplishments that you felt like quitting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, it goes back. I do have a bit of an obsessive compulsive idea when I like something, when I'm enjoying something, when I'm 100% in. But when it came to academics, and when it came to martial arts, I'm not really sure I had a day where I felt like quitting. I'd be frustrated with myself because I didn't accomplish what I wanted. I'll give you an example of how my obsessive compulsiveness. One day I came home with an A on a paper, and I knew you could attain an A plus, and so I was ticked off that I didn't get the A plus. But when I was doing the academics, I enjoyed myself. Now, for me, that's an important thing. If I'm not enjoying myself, meaning I'm not learning, I'm not being challenged, then I'm bored. And so that's how I was being challenged, because they would say things like, you really can't get through this master's program or a Ph.D. program in less than 3 years or 4 years. And so I would do it in 3 years. You really can't get hired as a professor until you get your Ph.D. So I got hired at the master's degree. I think the challenges helped me a lot. If you told me I couldn't do it, because I never felt that I was worthy enough to be where I was at, I'd say, okay, let me try this. Let me see if I can pull it off. Now, on the martial arts side, Master Beam had multiple black belts, had multiple abilities in different arts. And so he was just an example I wanted to be like. He gave me the advice one time that, in order to understand Tung Soo better, learn these other things. And so all these other arts that I've learned, except jiu-jitsu, they were all designed to help me understand Tung Soo better. And so, I don't know if that answers your question so much.
No, it does. Actually, it illustrates a very important point. And I'll explain what I mean by that. You'll hear me and I know you have heard me. And you'll hear me around those that are struggling with a lot of different things in life, especially addiction. So, we spend a lot of time around those struggling with addiction and trying to show them better days. And one of the things that as we're getting better in those moments, 24-hour living is important. These short-term measurable goals, because then you're not trying to get better for your whole life. You're trying to get better for that day. But at some point, you've gotten through that day pretty routinely. It started to add up over years. Any other calamity, you've lost the love of your life, or, death in a family, that first 24 hours is horrendous. And it doesn't say that the pain goes away, but over time it gets better. So how do you move beyond it? Well, at some point you've got to get to a new room. And one of the things I appreciate about what you just said is it illustrates my point is that, because my first question was going to be, well, do you enjoy yourself along the way? Are you just putting yourself through hell? And you just said, I enjoy that. Well, it illustrates the point, and I think as a society we screw up a little bit here, is that we want to focus so much on how good we feel that we really don't accomplish much. We don't push ourselves on any way, shape, or form because it sounds like it's grueling. But for an individual like yourself, that was part of the joy, was sometimes getting set back and doing what others around you said you couldn't do. Yeah. And in fact, I wholeheartedly believe that. In my personal life and professional life as well, I have a banner in my office that says I'm coming for every single thing they said, or everything they said I couldn't have. And for me, that's the joy, is the competition of saying, you told me I couldn't, so I will. And I find I'm glad the way that was characterized, because it really does illustrate the point, is that you said you have joy in that. I don't think I'm speaking for you. Is there any point in time when that grind is not fulfilling for you? I mean, where at some point there's got to be days where you're just like, I know you said you had frustration, but are there days where you just said, you know what, this path that I've been pushing so hard on doesn't make sense for me anymore?
The only time I've really experienced that is in the business side of running a martial arts school. You look at my academics, and I have no business education, none. And so everything I always joke that I make mistakes. I just won't make the same mistake twice. Mm-hmm. And so I read a lot. The only time I ever get really generally frustrated is, when you got to do business type things, advertise for the school, get new students in there. The biggest one, to be honest with you, is when a student quits. You know me, Chris, and I love my students. Mm-hmm. I mean, I tell them I love them. And it's weird as a martial artist to hear that in certain school studios. But if you I die for you. You're one of mine. And when students quit, a lot of times they'll quit and either they just disappear or they come up with some nonsensical idea of why it's difficult. Mm-hmm. And I remind them that I've been doing this difficult thing for 30 some years. They haven't experienced difficult yet. And that's when I get to the point where I go, man, if I could be a multimillionaire, then I could limit the number of students I have, keep doing the same thing I'm doing, but really focus on those few. That's the only time it really gets kind of frustrating.
Right. And some of that is because you expect that because they're in the construct of a teaching environment that has the same belief system in its teaching, that people's experiences are going to bring them to the table with the exact same, rigor of learning, and they don't. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why people do things, and I do see that in you. As a lot of times you'll take that on as like, okay, now what? So you'll probably, and I've seen you do this, a single student will leave or two students will leave, and you'll double down on what you can do to correct that. And so now it becomes your obsession for a while to figure out how to make that happen again.
Actually, that reminds me of a story. I had a student that actually said he wants to learn jiu-jitsu. He's a dear student of mine, a black belt of mine. And I actually went and started to learn jiu-jitsu with him. That's where I got the jiu-jitsu experience because I didn't want to lose him. So I get obsessed with that.
That's an extreme example, because you put your school in a track to become a Gracie garage because one student, I never heard that story, because one student wanted to learn it.
Because one student, well, you didn't help anything. I came up one time to help you do some striking for jiu-jitsu. And the next morning I woke up and my chin was all sore, and I realized you hadn't hit me that much. And come to find out, when we were playing around a little bit, you would ground your head at me. I realized I knew standing up I was good. I realized on the ground I could do nothing.
Yeah.
So time to jiu-jitsu.
I've never fought fair.
Neither have I.
Yeah. So foreheads and cross arms, they're wonderful manipulators. Anyway, so yeah, I didn't realize that was the reason why you went down that road. It makes a lot of sense that you would go that extreme with it. You talked about obsession on it. But so what I think is interesting is how, I got to tell the audience, he's not reading my notes. It's just funny to me because this is kind of the relationship we have. But you're really building to the next point we're talking about, okay, so you've had all these accolades in school, in college, and Ph.D.s and all these languages, and now you've all these black belts and martial arts schools, and you get one student that wants to do something, and you go so far as to open a Gracie garage, and so all that's going on, and it led up to one of your toughest challenges that you faced in this whole experience, and that was being a small business owner in a pandemic. So
Oh,
while all these paths came together to give you the opportunity to live in an environment that says, okay, I've got students that I can impact their lives, and that connectivity is there for you. And then all of a sudden we have a global pandemic. You're a small business owner. You don't have the business background at all. And on top of it, there isn't a belt or a degree you get for surviving. So even those
right.
milestones that you chase, there aren't any. And in fact, there really wasn't an end point to any of it. You were just going to decide to survive or not. So tell me about that experience, because that's something that's, I think, takes you outside of any of these other accomplishments.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in, I think it was March 2020, when they said, was it 10 days to flatten the curve? And I remember thinking, okay, 10 days. I'm a human. I pretend I'm a Christian. I can be kind. We can close down for 10 days and take care of things.
Mm-hmm.
3 months later, we were starting to hurt. And I just approached it the same way I would a fight. And I remember telling my wife the one day, I said, if the government's going to take my business and keep me closed, then they got to fight as hard to take it as I fought to start it. And we just kicked it in high gear. In those 3 months leading up to that, we just worked our tail off. Most of my friends in martial arts schools, they would run a Zoom class, tape it, and you could watch the Zoom class. Not me and my son. We had 4 classes a night going live. So we ran 4 Zoom sessions. We did 15, 20-minute private lessons for every student that we could get in throughout the week. We worked harder than I've ever worked to do it. But I just went by the theory that, look, this is the fight. I'm on my back. They're pounding me. I got to get through this. And then we got to July, and I said, I got to open. I can't not. But I did things realizing that, I shifted into survival mode. I just took my salary, set it back, realized money's not coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We started doing everything we could. We stayed engaged with the students. I realized that at that point, martial arts wasn't about the physical fighting side. It was about the community side.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just made sure that the community that the students were getting was equal to or better than what they got live.
Isn't that
and so
true?
what ended up happening?
Isn't that true about all things, though? I mean, at some point, it comes down to the fact of how you're influencing those around you.
Oh, yeah.
What impact are you having on them? Because there's only so much we're going to accomplish in and of ourselves. But what seeds are we planting? So I'm curious about that. You say it did come down to that. I guess maybe what was some of the feedback you were getting from people as you're going through this season? So you're making all these moves. You've made determination. You're going to set your salary aside. We're going forward. We're going at it. But there's still people being influenced by it. What was there? Was it a solidarity? Was it a concern? Did they feel like they were getting through the season better because of what you did?
Yeah, there was really probably 2 or 3 different responses. Actually, I'd say 3. There was the group that immediately said, look, we're not live. We're going to cover our own tails. We're out. Mm-hmm. Then there was a group that said, we like you less personally. We're not really gaining anything, but we're going to hang out for a while. We're going to try to get through this together. And then there was a
so
core group.
That was your wife and 3 kids. Okay. So now
there's the 3 kids that looked at Dad. We got your back for about 3 weeks, then we're out of here.
you live in the pool. We'll be in the house.
Exactly. But then there was a core group that said, look, we're with you no matter what happens. You've invested in us. We're here. To give you a sense of numbers, when we closed, when we went closed for those 10 days, supposedly, we had 150 students. When we reopened in July, we had 68. So it gives you a sense of where that core group was. We've since regrown to 170. Mm-hmm. So, and we just keep adding people on. So it was, those were the responses. But I think part of it, the reason I got that harsh response, I think, was nobody had experienced this before. Mm-mm. Outside of a movie where zombies are outside, nobody knew, we just didn't know what to do, And so I think I never felt bad that people were leaving. I kind of understood. I mean, I needed the money. I was first going to lose my business, but I understood what was going on.
And I heard that from you as we went through that season, and some of the things you would tell me about. I never heard you. You generally recognize it as a business concern that you had to address the business. I feel like you've always done a good job of assessing what needed to be addressed. Where your true enemy was, so to speak. Yeah. But you did come out that season remarkably. I think a lot of it was based on decisions you made during the season to course correct. So maybe some things that you got used to doing that really weren't that good for the business. You did adjust those things. You talked about, the organization of it and stuff. Again, we going back to these seasons where failure is so close. Those decisions that you make and your plans that you stick to and the accountabilities around you make a difference. And I feel like that helped you through that season, but you're kind of an old school guy, like a really old school guy in terms of your music you like. Probably the most depressing country music in the planet is something that lifts you up. It's annoying. I would honestly, I don't know how you are uplifted by this music for real. I would have been dead 17 times by now. But
do you remember the time you called me in Dallas? I was in Dallas at the seminary. You called, you said, "What are you listening to?" And I told you, he said, "Les, put the beer down, take the shotgun out of your mouth, and go turn that guy off the music."
It was bad. Like everything, and you just love it, and I just don't. Man, I mean, it's good music. It's for nostalgia, I guess, but not to like make your feelings anything that you want to do something with.
Well, I always go by the theory that, look, my life's not that bad.
Okay, well, at least I know the perspective after almost 50 years of living. But you have you're a balanced person, and you are an anomaly. I've talked about myself as an anomaly in terms of how I think about things, but I truly think you are. I mean, the way I think that does ground you in a lot of uncertain times too, is because you've always got the reason I bring up the old school thing is that you still draw back to some stability and something that has a warm feeling for you and memories and family and all that. And I know that music means something to you, even though for somebody like me, it would probably put me in a really bad frame of mind. But you've done so much, and it's got to feel great in some respects. So what goes on in your head as you're in life, and as you're doing all these things? What's actually going on in your head?
Well, ironically, what's going on in my head a lot of times is this feeling of not deserving the accolades and not living up to it, and just not being in real life with the papers I have in front of me on my wall say that I am. I think the title of the podcast has something to do with about being an imposter. I mean, I felt like that most of my life. Mm-hmm. And every time I hit a milestone that the average person would get excited and maybe even a little arrogant about, I just couldn't enjoy it, and still don't necessarily enjoy it, because like I said earlier in the podcast, I've always went by the theory that if I could do it, man, anybody can do this. And as I get a little older, I realize I've done some things that normal people can't do, but that's not how I feel too often. And I actually think that's one of the things that's driven me to be as successful as I am, mm-hmm. trying to be good enough so people can, like me or enjoy me or let me into that circle or something like that.
It's almost like it manifests it more when you're not in the middle of an accomplishment. So like when you're striving and in the middle of the heat of getting a Ph.D., you're so consumed with that time. I mean, it takes so much of your time to do that work. And it doesn't seem to manifest itself because your focus is really on the goal. Or, recently you had another massive martial arts accomplishment. And at this point, I don't know the levels that I know what I've read, but I mean, you just had another major milestone. What was the one you just went and did?
I just earned 5th Dan, which is a 5th degree black belt in Tung Soo.
Yeah, and that's your base martial art, which is really where it all started. And it's a pretty impressive art in terms of its capabilities. And so you're not standing around in your pajamas doing katas with that stuff. It's super serious, and it's an impressive accomplishment. When you're in the middle of that training, I don't see, like, I know you so well that I don't really see the earmarks of you feeling that way. It's when when the dust settles and you've got, like you said, the certificate on the wall, that it almost as if you're still, it's like that just went away. It's not real. So,
for me, it's when I got asked, well, to tell you how it manifests for this one particular accolade, my master instructor said, "Hey, it's time for you to test." And I honestly said, I'm not ready. And he said, no, you have to. And he kind of cajoled me into it. And finally, he just pulled the senior master card and said, "Look, you're testing." And you can ask my wife and kids. I tested, passed, got the rank. It was like, yeah, okay, I got it. So this can't be that important because I got it. Let's move along and see what happens. And when you realize how few people get that rank, and so no, I can appreciate that.
It's almost as if that like the more accomplished you get, the more you feel that way. Like it's not as much work. But what you're forgetting is it was all that base work. I think that I know you know this, but for my audience, I think the reason that we feel these things, I know from my personal imposter syndrome that I feel like I have, where I feel like an imposter a lot of times based on knowing how my own mind thinks. It's that base work that you did for decades makes those higher level accomplishments less work because you have all the baseline. You're not starting from zero. You're just demonstrating excellence at a higher level or you know, at any number of these things. And your ability to teach it and pass it along.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too that affects me, and this is the academic side, is the higher you get, or I guess I should say the deeper you get in a study of something, you begin to realize how little you actually know. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got all these degrees, and when I sit right down to it, I realize I have an expertise level in a very small element of the Old Testament studies. And I'm okay with that. That's how academics works. And so I think what is the higher I get in all these things, I realize that, you know, I keep opening the door to a bigger room and learning a small part of it. Mm-hmm. And so there's a humility that naturally should come from that. In fact, if you talk to a lot of people who are, you know, well, go on Facebook, make a statement, see what happens. And you get a lot of people who don't know anything making really big statements about stuff. And you know what, they need to be punched straight in the head. But the reality is they don't know what they don't know. And
what's funny is this conversation we're having right now, and you know, you're pretty you're acting pretty passive, and but I think it's funny when some people start going on there how you don't even really get aggressive. It's just you're pretty sarcastic in your responses, so it's kind of funny.
Well, you know we're in trouble when you hear me say, "Look, my friend."
Yeah, that's always been the joke. Look, my friend. It's if Les ever calls you his friend, you're not his friend. Let's just, if you take nothing else away from the show, if he says, "Look, my friend," you're no friends, and you won't be friends. At least not for the next 15, 20 minutes or so.
Exactly.
So, you know, we actually kind of joked about this. You know, you're talking about social media and stuff, but so your head. It's an interesting situation. So you as a guest, you play into this notion of, you know, living a high risk life falls apart. You know, you're in bad times. Hope is closer than it seems. Your version of the story is slightly different than what other people might manifest. So for mine, it was a total collapse. It was pretty obvious what was going on. You know, get your head off the backpack in the cemetery. You know, put the bottle down, pull your life together. For you, this is going on in your head. Like it doesn't. You have troubles. I mean, don't get me wrong. But this destruction is playing out in your head over and over again. Yeah. And yet outside of that, your response to it is turning to outward excellence. You know, what's going on in your head, what you're actually accomplishing, and what is society's impact on that? As you're trying to, you understand what's going on in your head, and you're trying to control this in a way that's not destroying you. What is society doing this? You know, you just brought up social media and other things.
I mean, society is always out to get you. I mean, and I think people, I mean, where it manifests.
Why do you believe that?
Pardon me?
Why do you believe that?
Because even people who mean well say stupid things. I'll give you an illustration. The strip mall that my karate school's in is known for having people come in, rent a spot, start a business, and a business falls apart. They don't realize that statistically, like 70 or 80% of all businesses that start up fall apart. It has nothing to do with your location. But because so many times it's happened in the strip mall, excuse me, I've had friends come in and say, "Wow, we can't believe you're still standing because so many people in this spot have left." Now, I don't think they were wishing me ill. I think they were just making a poorly timed, poorly stated observation.
Right. Their version of reality wasn't reflecting your possibility.
Yeah. And so I think society doesn't, you know, it always comes across rough. I also think the world doesn't necessarily rejoice in other people's success. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever heard me say it, Chris, but I've lived by this. If you're my friend, if you're my family member, if you're somebody I care about, I can be down to my last dollar. And if you win the lottery, I'm going to be happy for you because you're a friend, you're a family member, you're somebody I care about. Society doesn't do that too often. And so, you know, when you talk about being in my head, you know, where I notice it now, because now I have a lot more control of my business and things are going well, is I'll notice it in the morning where I wonder before I got out of bed, am I capable of doing the same thing well today? And, you know, then we're talking about, you know, society says things or Facebook posts things. And and it's always there to kind of undermine you. You see it in posts that I'm involved with on Facebook where somebody will say, "You need to have a hand to throw a punch." Well, it seems so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make that statement on a Facebook page with 5 martial artists, you're going to have 5 different people telling you, "No, you don't. You don't need a hand to throw a punch. You
It's
need
not
2
actually a
tongues."
punch.
Yeah. What is esoterically? What is a punch? What does it mean to punch?
Is it a strike?
I know what it means to punch.
Well, I
Here
mean,
for a
in
second.
the Johnny Depp Amber Heard's trial, we found out that it's a hit and a punch are 2 different things.
Exactly. And so I think society. I don't always think people mean to be so damaging.
Mm-hmm.
They just are.
Yeah, I want to back up for one thing. I have a personal story that can validate what you're saying relative to your willingness to give. In 2016-17 range, I was a hot mess, and it was in spring of 2017. My father made a statement to my mother that he later told me, "I don't know where this is headed, but I don't think it's good." And his implication on that was that I wouldn't be living much longer. And it wasn't suicidal ideation. It's just I didn't care about my life or really anybody else's. It just I was in a mental health crisis, and we were at a point where I started to at least acknowledge that I might consider help. And it was within 4 hours, probably realistically within 6 hours, as the stories, because I wasn't really recalling response time or anything else. No questions asked. You drove from Pennsylvania to Rochester, New York, to take me to an emergency psychiatric unit to be evaluated, to hopefully get me into a system that would refer me to help. And to me, that was the greatest illustration of your giving to those around you, and the fact that you really put everything aside and with no question, just did it. And I know that that's loyalty to me and based on our relationship, but I do think that that's how you behave with those that you're close to. You really do give of yourself in that extent. And I think that's probably why your students stick around as much as you do too, because you are a loyal person. And I know in that example, I mean, we had I'll try not to get too far down the road in this, but it was a pretty interesting experience either way. So there's 2 sides of Lester. There's a side that will help you, and he can help you. There's another side that you have to be careful when he does help you. So he got me to the hospital and almost got us thrown out of the hospital while he was there.
But I almost got that caddy search I wanted so badly.
We'll tell the story real quick. So we're getting on this elevator to go to the floor that I had to go through my eval on, and they're searching me for obvious reasons.
You got to understand one thing.
Yep.
Hicks's, when nervous, joke. So they got to start there.
The problem is I knew you were joking, and you knew you were joking, but nobody else around you knew you were joking, including the individual that actually could impact your life. Yeah. So we're getting on this elevator, and we're getting patted down and whatever, and Lester's not getting patted down. And so the first time he said it, I forget, what did you actually say to this guy? The security guard's doing the patting down. And what did you say?
I told him, I said, look, I thought that he would have to frisk me. It made more sense. I said, look, if you need to frisk me, it's okay. It's not a problem. And he said, no, you're good. And I said, and I quote, no, you can if you want to. I don't mind.
We're on an elevator, though. We're right outside the elevator in this close space, so it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. So then we get into the elevator, and I just keep telling him that he can frisk me, and I'd really appreciate it if we went up the.
Yeah, it was uncomfortable. So if you want help from Lester, just know that you don't know what you're going to experience on the other side. And I can tell you that through that evening, it was a pretty interesting evening, and it was one of the important crossroads for me to be able to sit here today. So I can personally attest that when he means it, when he says what he says, it's not just some casual, I'm going to bring you a donut. He'll go all in. And so I appreciate that about you. And the main reason why I bring that story up, that's not just because we got a million stories we could sit here and just have, chatty hour. But the reason I bring that up is because here you are self-professing this imposter thinking in your head. You have piles of accolades around you. I myself, and I'm sure many people around you have experienced the giving nature of who you are. And yet you're still in this place where you feel as though you're an imposter. And I can sit here today and tell you you're not. Yeah. So I could sit here and tell you you're not for the next 3 hours. And tomorrow morning, you'd still have a moment, or even this afternoon, that would come back in your head. So I guess for those that struggle, because I'm sure you're not the only one. There's 2 of us on this right now. And Scott in the studio, who owns Rockvox Recording and Production, that's helping us, he was not admitting it in the headset, so I don't know if he does or not, but I know you and I do. We, how do you move beyond that? Like, how do you get to a place where you are healthy? Because that's not healthy.
No, I honestly, I think age has helped a little bit, and the reality that coming to the grips with the fact that my self-worth and value is not connected to whether, or it doesn't rely on what somebody else thinks about me. And as I get older, that's become easier. It's always going to be hard because we live in community, but for me anyway, more and more I realize that I don't necessarily care if somebody doesn't believe that I'm a fifth don, or doesn't, get all swoony when they hear I have, an earned Ph.D. Mm-hmm. And that helps a lot. That helps an awful lot. The other thing too, and this goes back to community and having the right people around you, people like you who I trust, who I adore. When you say something complimentary about, how things are going for me, it sticks a little more. When my wife says it, it sticks quite a bit. So I think for me, as I've gotten older, I realize the value of listening to key people and the value to ignoring most of the rest.
Mm-hmm. And as a side, you have one of the most loyal, incredible wives that any man could ever ask for sure.
Oh, yeah. I've put her through hell and back. So absolutely.
No, she's a pretty amazing woman. And, I think that obviously anything that she says, it has a lot of credibility associated with it. So here we are, you've recognized some things about you, and we've talked through it. You talked through some of your accolades and everything else, so what does the future hold? I mean, what are your goals? What motivates you now?
Actually, I don't know if it's my age. I go back to age a lot, but I don't know if it's my age or just
it's the music you listen to. Lighten up.
if it's not written before 1960, I don't want to listen to it.
Try some newer music, even if it's dating you a little bit. Your outlook will change tremendously.
In reality, my music's actually pretty eclectic. On my iPod, you actually have everything from Gregorian chant to the highlights of Chris Christopherson.
You are ridiculous. You're ridiculous.
But anyway, I actually think some of my goals has to do with being a business owner now. I am looking into maybe starting. We've mentioned it, a chat about it. Starting some coaching. Mm-hmm. Thinking about building passive income. I like the challenge of building a business. That to me is actually kind of fun. But also thinking in terms of, I can't kick and punch and roll around the floor forever. Mm-hmm. And so maybe by the time I'm 65 or 70, I want to have something coming in that doesn't require me to beat my body up anymore.
Right.
Not that I'm not going to quit karate, but just I can't rely on it as an income.
Sure.
So that's really where my goals are now.
That's going to change the skill set slightly because as you move in there, you're probably going to have to, get more training to understand how to change that skill set, because everything that you've accomplished up till now is about your own personal accomplishments. What you and I have talked about, where you're headed with life, it's about other people accomplishing what you've accomplished. And so that's a slightly different skill set, because I think that can, in some cases, be more frustrating if they're not thinking the way that you're thinking, if they're not driven as you are.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely. And the thing is, the way I've coached people to this point is, give me 100 push-ups or do this. People are paying you to coach them. It doesn't quite work that same way. Yeah. So but that's really where I'm thinking now. I'm actually at peace, really, where a lot of things are going. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So, we're, getting close to an end here, but, we had some objectives for this show, obviously, and a little clickbaity on the title, but I mean, it's a huge step to recognize that you feel this imposter syndrome. I think a lot of us don't really take the time to understand why are we feeling this, and honestly, you can self-sabotage yourself with that. I know for me, especially first time in, even on this show and the work that we're doing here, the starts are hard for me because I have all this doubt. Can you do it? Like you and I have talked about it, even prior to the show, how many hundreds of conversations that we've had that have lasted 2 hours long on the phone over the years, and yet a show like this, you sit back and you're a little nervous about consolidating it into something that makes sense. And I think that imposter syndrome can be something that really is a derailer.
And something that goes along with that, I actually had a close faculty member friend who had told me to get out of the one school that I was in and go someplace else. And I didn't listen to him and pursue that because I had so sabotaged myself into thinking that this is all I could do. There's nobody else is going to want me. And he was saying basically, people do go do this. And it stopped me from increasing my career. I think everybody at some point feels impostering, like they're an imposter, or they've been promoted beyond their skill set. You got to work hard to ignore it. You got to work hard to realize that somebody has value in you.
And I'm not trying to get us off subject here at all. I think it relates. There is another side of this. Sometimes people will give you advice based on their context that sounds like the right advice because that's the natural progression for things. And we have to be savvy enough to understand, look past the imposter syndrome and recognize not every piece of advice we get from other people is a direction that we should take, because we may actually be on a path that's different and possibly accomplishing more than they did. And having the understanding of where you're headed is really important. I'm a big believer in goals. What are you trying to get out of this life? In my story, it's really easy for me to look to other people for advice all the time because my imposter syndrome says you're basically a failure, and if you're left to yourself, you're going to collapse. And at some point, I had to sit back and say, there's been some pretty remarkable things in my journey, and it has a lot to do with my belief and what my purpose and my calling is and who I am and what I can do and will go to do. And I think for you, one thing I think that you possess that I've seen over the years is that you don't want to do anything. You will do things. You tell somebody tells you can't, I promise you'll do it.
Yeah. It's got me in trouble a few times. It's got me a lot of goals accomplished. And I used to talk about this to my students when I was a professor, that I was never the smartest guy in the room, but I'd outwork you. And that was always, that's how I handled it. And that mantra has actually kind of played out all my entire life. I've never been the elite person in a situation. And, that's actually the positive side to the imposter idea, is that my head's not so big and that I think I'm just going to naturally fall into success. I got to work for it. The problem is I just don't get to enjoy the success for a moment, when I get there. But no, that idea of not listening to all advice is very important. In fact, my folks actually gave me advice not to go in business for myself many, many years ago. I wanted to start a cry school then. And that's actually what drove that.
You'll get a lot of that. You'll get a lot of that advice anyway when it comes to financial stretches. There's going to be a lot more conservative thinking. If you're going to stretch yourself, you'll always find somebody to tell you not to do it.
Yep.
Speaking of telling you not to do it, the one piece of advice you can never rely on Lester for is don't. We've got this ongoing joke. Out of all the trouble I've got in, the only reason I got in trouble is because he didn't tell me to not. So don't count on him to keep you out of trouble.
Exactly. and keep you off speakerphone when you have a message.
Yeah, that's the other ongoing joke. We'll leave voicemails for each other and ask if we're on speaker, and then just let it sit for a second to make sure you get off speaker. And then all of a sudden we go on a podcast where we are on speaker less, by the way.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you definitely spending the time to do this. I know that your family's been experiencing the COVID for the week, and you get a little under energy, but thank you for getting up and doing this. Is there anything from your experiences that you'd like to leave the audience with to kind of encourage them in those seasons that they may not see the collapse coming, or they're in the middle of a mess and they really just they don't see hope?
Yeah. Man, that I wasn't really expecting.
Oops.
I guess if I were going to tell somebody, if I look back to when COVID hit and everything got shut down, the thing that got me through it is that 90%, 95% of the things that we do cost us money, but my time and how hard I work, I have, is relatively free to me. So when you're in those moments where it's really hard, where it's really tough, just work harder. Just knuckle under, realizing there's going to be a time where you're gonna be able to take a breather for a second, and just realize that people are so afraid of working, and I don't understand that. They want everything handed to them.
A lot of times those new opportunities come out of the sky because you at least move forward. You're in a new room with new perspective.
There's a song that I listen to that says, "The harder I work, the luckier I get." And
the most positive line in any song you've ever listened to.
Exactly. Well, the previous lines, he's going to run his motorcycle into a tree. So the difference, it equals out.
That sounds about right. Well, thanks, Les. I really appreciate you coming on the show. This has been fun. We've talked about for a lot of years in different projects doing this type of thing. So you've been a great guest, and thank you for being so candid with some of the things that you're experiencing in your life.
Sure. I hope it works out. Hope it does what we're supposed to do.
So for my audience, please check us out on our Chris and Retro podcast on the try again, Chris. Check us out on our YouTube channel, Chris and Retro. You can like and subscribe, comments. We got some good comments on the last episode that we put out. You'll hear us pretty much anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and we really appreciate your participation in this. We also are going to be doing some post-show Zooms, one for a professional track and one for a personal track, where you can discuss some of the subject matter that came up in here. Leslie had a lot of relevant experience around business and some of the challenges with COVID. If you feel that this is something you want to be on the show to discuss with some of your peers, please send me an email at ignite@2017performance.com. That's the word 20, number 17performance.com. I'd love to hear from you. And one other shout out I want to make here as a huge thank you to Jesse Merle with Jesse on Fire podcast and Jesse on Everything podcast. He's been a tremendous, our YouTube channels actually. He's been a tremendous support and advice and how to do this the correct way. He's gone way beyond his need. It's something he should have to do just to be kind. So I just want to make sure that he gets a shout out, and thank you so much for his support on this, on what we're trying to accomplish here. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.